I refused to cancel my son's emergency doctor's appointment just to drive my sister to the mall. Dad threw me against the wall. Her future matters. Your son's doesn't. So I walked out and they lost everything. I felt my back slam against the drywall, knocking a framed photo of my son's first birthday askew. The impact forced air from my lungs as my father towered over me, his face contorted with a rage I had never seen before, not even during the worst moments of my childhood. His words cut deeper than the physical pain radiating through my shoulders. Her future matters. Your son's doesn't. Those 8 words crystallized the truth I had been denying for 32 years. I was the forgotten child, the one whose needs were sacrificed on the altar of my sister Meredith's whims. And now my own son was being dismissed with the same casual cruelty. As I struggled to breathe, watching my carefully ironed work shirt wrinkle under his grip, something inside me finally shattered. Not my spirit, but the chains of obligation that had kept me bound to this toxic family dynamic even into adulthood, even after I had my own child to protect. All because I refused to cancel my 4-year-old son's emergency doctor's appointment, to drive my sister to the mall for what she called a crucial shopping trip. Looking back, the signs of favoritism had always been there, scattered throughout my childhood, like breadcrumbs leading to this inevitable breaking point. But I had convinced myself that becoming a parent myself, giving my parents a grandchild, would somehow equalize the imbalance. I had been catastrophically wrong. At 32, I was a single mother working full-time as a graphic designer, while raising my son Ethan alone, after my ex-husband abandoned us when Ethan was 6 months old. The divorce had been brutal, leaving me with minimal child support and mountains of debt from legal fees. I had moved back to my hometown 2 years ago, hoping family support would make single parenthood more manageable. Instead, I found myself trapped in the same patterns that had defined my childhood. Only now, my son was collateral damage in my family's dysfunction. My younger sister Meredith, 23, and working part-time at a boutique while living rent-free with our parents, had never known such struggles. From her custom bedroom suite when she turned 16, to the luxury car she received on her 21st birthday, Meredith had been showered with advantages I could only dream about. When I turned 16, I received a card and a used bicycle from a garage sale. When I turned 21, my parents reminded me that they expected me to start contributing to household expenses if I continued living at home during college. The disparity had always been obvious, but I had learned early to swallow my resentment and focus on building my own life independent of their support. Sophia, you understand how tight money is right now, my mother would say whenever I needed something, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Yet there always seemed to be money for Meredith's shopping trips, her weekend getaways with friends, her constantly updated wardrobe for the Instagram presence she was cultivating as an aspiring lifestyle influencer. I remember the Christmas when I was 24 and Meredith was 15. I had asked for help with a security deposit for my first apartment, roughly $800. My parents apologetically explained they couldn't manage it this year, that things were especially tight. That same morning, Meredith unwrapped a $2,000 camera system for her growing social media hobby. I swallowed my hurt and worked overtime at my retail job to cover the deposit myself, telling myself that was just how life worked. Some people were born lucky. Others had to create their own luck through hard work and determination. This pattern continued throughout our adult lives. When I got pregnant at 29, already separated from my husband, who would soon disappear entirely, my parents' response was disappointment, thinly veiled as concern. How will you manage alone? Who's going to help you? What about your career? The questions came rapid fire, each one an indictment of my life choices rather than an offer of support. When Meredith announced she was dropping out of community college to focus on building her influencer brand, they threw her a celebration dinner and promised to support her dreams however they could. Despite their lack of enthusiasm, I had hoped that Ethan's arrival would soften something in my parents, that a grandchild would shift their priorities and create new family bonds. For the first few months, it seemed to work. They visited regularly, brought gifts, cooed over baby photos. My mother even offered to babysit occasionally, though she usually had some excuse when I actually needed her help. Then Ethan turned 1, and the novelty apparently wore off. Suddenly their visits became infrequent. The gifts stopped coming, and babysitting offers evaporated entirely unless I begged. And even then, they often cancelled at the last minute because something came up with Meredith. Meanwhile, Meredith's influencer career was taking off in small ways. She had accumulated 50,000 followers on Instagram and was starting to land minor sponsorship deals for beauty products and clothing brands. Our parents treated this like she had won a Nobel Prize, constantly talking about her success, sharing her posts, attending events where she was networking with other minor influencers. When I landed a significant client for my freelance graphic design work, bringing in nearly $10,000 for a single project, my mother's response was a distracted, "That's nice, dear," before launching into a story about Meredith's latest brand partnership. The imbalance extended to how they treated Ethan. My son rarely received gifts from his grandparents. Maybe something small and generic on his birthday and Christmas. When he started preschool, I asked if they might help with tuition, since I was struggling to cover it along with rent and childcare. My father gave me a lecture about financial responsibility and making choices I could afford. Yet, when Meredith wanted to attend an expensive influencer conference in Los Angeles, they not only paid her registration fee, but also covered her flight and hotel. The conference cost them nearly $3,000. Ethan's preschool tuition was $1,200 per semester. I stopped asking for help after that, determined to manage on my own, even when it meant working until midnight after Ethan went to bed, taking on extra freelance projects, and sacrificing any semblance of work-life balance. My son deserved stability and opportunities, even if I had to exhaust myself to provide them. But I couldn't completely cut my parents out of our lives. Ethan loved his grandparents, despite their obvious favoritism toward their younger, more glamorous daughter. He didn't understand yet that Grandma and Grandpa saw him as less important than Aunt Meredith's social media metrics. And despite everything, some part of me still hoped they would eventually see what they were doing, that family bonds would ultimately triumph over whatever dysfunction drove their behavior. That hope died the morning of Ethan's emergency appointment. My son had been running a fever for 3 days, accompanied by a persistent cough that was getting worse, despite over-the-counter medications. The previous night, his temperature had spiked to 103 degrees, and he had cried for hours, his small body racked with coughs that sounded increasingly concerning. I had barely slept, alternating between cool compresses on his forehead and anxiously monitoring his breathing. At 6 in the morning, I called the pediatrician's office and spoke to the on-call nurse, describing Ethan's symptoms with growing alarm. She recommended bringing him in immediately, concerned about possible pneumonia or a severe respiratory infection. The office had an opening at 11:30, and I took it without hesitation. I called my boss to explain I would be working from home that day, settled Ethan on the couch with his favorite blanket and cartoons, and began preparing everything we would need for the appointment. That's when Meredith called. Her voice bright and demanding in a way that immediately set my teeth on edge. She didn't ask how I was, didn't inquire about her nephew who she hadn't seen in 3 weeks, despite living less than 10 miles away. Instead, she launched directly into her request. "Sophia, I need you to drive me to Riverside Mall today. The Sephora there is having their VIP sale, and I absolutely have to be there when it opens at 10. My car is making a weird noise, and Dad says I shouldn't drive it until the mechanic looks at it tomorrow. But this sale only happens twice a year, and all the best products will be gone if I wait. I can't today, Meredith. Ethan is sick, and I have a doctor's appointment at 11:30. Can't you reschedule? It's just a little cold, right? This sale is crucial for my content creation. I have a sponsored post scheduled for next week, and I need these specific products." No, it's not just a little cold. He's had a high fever for days, and the nurse thinks it might be pneumonia. This is an emergency appointment. Meredith made an exasperated sound. "You always make everything so dramatic, Sophia. Kids get sick all the time. Just give him some Tylenol and take him tomorrow. The mall is 40 minutes away. If I leave now, I can drop you off, get back for Ethan's appointment, and pick you up afterward if needed." I kept my voice steady, trying to be reasonable even as anger simmered beneath the surface. "That's not going to work." Meredith's tone shifted to petulant frustration. "I need to be there right when the sale starts. All the limited edition items sell out in the first hour. Why can't you just cancel the appointment?" "It's not like they're going to cure him today anyway, because he's 4 years old and struggling to breathe properly, because his fever spiked to dangerous levels last night, because I'm his mother and his health is my priority. Can't you ask Mum or Dad to drive you?" I tried. "Mum is getting her hair done and Dad has a golf game. You're my only option. I'm not an option today. I'm sorry, but Ethan comes first." There was a long pause, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in my sister's head as she calculated her next move. "You know what? Fine. I'll just tell Mum and Dad that you refuse to help me. Again." Her emphasis on the last word was clearly meant to evoke a pattern of sisterly neglect that didn't exist. Before I could respond, she had hung up. I sat staring at my phone, a familiar cocktail of guilt and resentment churning in my stomach. Ethan coughed from the living room, a wet, rattling sound that immediately refocused my priorities. I went to check on him, feeling his forehead and finding it still warm, despite the fever reducer I had given him an hour ago. His eyes were glassy and unfocused, his usual energetic chatter replaced by listless silence. There was no universe in which shopping trumped my son's health, and I refused to feel guilty about that fundamental truth. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. My father's number appeared on the screen, and I briefly considered not answering. But some ingrained sense of obligation made me pick up, a decision I would soon regret. "Sophia, your mother just got off the phone with Meredith." His voice was already edged with accusation. "She's very upset that you won't help her today." I explained the situation to Meredith. Ethan is sick and has a doctor's appointment. It's not just a cold, Dad. The nurse is concerned about pneumonia. There was a dismissive sound on the other end. Kids are resilient. You're probably overreacting like you always do. Remember when you insisted he needed to go to the emergency room for that stomach bug last year? It turned out to be nothing serious. That stomach bug had him vomiting for 12 hours straight and severely dehydrated. The ER doctor said we were right to bring him in. And regardless, this is different. He's been sick for days and getting worse, not better. Your sister has an important opportunity today. This sale could provide content for weeks of posts, potentially attracting new followers and sponsors. Surely you can see how that benefits her career. And my son's health benefits his entire life. There's no comparison here, Dad. I could hear him relaying my words to my mother in the background, her indistinct voice rising in what sounded like agreement with his position. The familiar dynamic was already unfolding. My parents united in support of Meredith, while I stood alone defending the most basic parental responsibility. Sophia, you need to understand that Meredith's career is at a crucial stage right now. Your father's tone had shifted to the patronizing patience he used when explaining things he considered too complex for me to grasp. She's building something real, something with potential. Your job is flexible. You work from home. Surely you can take Ethan to the doctor literally any other time. The appointment is in 2 hours. If I cancel now, I might not get another slot for days. Do you understand what pneumonia can do to a 4-year-old if left untreated? Do you understand what missed opportunities can do to a young woman's career? He countered. Meredith has worked very hard to build her following. This isn't just about shopping. It's about maintaining her professional image and meeting commitments to her sponsors. Her professional image as an influencer who posts makeup tutorials is more important than your grandson's respiratory health. The sarcasm slipped out before I could stop it. Watch your tone. My father's voice hardened. You've always been jealous of your sister's success, and now you're using your son as an excuse to undermine her. The accusation was so absurd, so fundamentally disconnected from reality, that I actually laughed. A short, bitter sound that clearly angered him further. I'm not having this conversation anymore. Ethan needs to see a doctor, and that's final. If Meredith wants to go shopping, she can take an Uber or reschedule. Those are her options. You're being selfish and short-sighted. When Meredith is a successful influencer with major brand deals, you'll regret not supporting her when it mattered. And when Ethan is healthy and thriving, I won't regret a single decision I made to prioritize his well-being. We're done here. I ended the call, my hands shaking with adrenaline and suppressed fury. Ethan called out for water, his voice hoarse and small, and I pushed aside the emotional turmoil to focus on what mattered. My son needed me. Whatever drama my family wanted to manufacture could wait. I spent the next 90 minutes caring for Ethan, monitoring his temperature, encouraging him to drink fluids, and preparing his medical history and current symptoms for the doctor. At 10:45, I bundled him into the car, securing him in his booster seat with extra care as he dozed fitfully. The drive to the pediatrician's office usually took 15 minutes, giving us plenty of time to make the 11:30 appointment. We had just pulled out of my apartment complex when my phone rang again. My mother this time. I let it go to voicemail. unwilling to engage in another argument while driving with my sick child in the car. She called back immediately, then again, then again. After the fifth call, I pulled over and answered, my patience completely exhausted. "What?" I snapped. "Don't you take that tone with me, young lady." My mother's voice was sharp with indignation. "Your father and I have discussed this situation, and we've decided you need to reconsider your priorities. My priority is sitting in the back seat, running a fever and coughing up phlegm. Nothing you say is going to change that. Sophia Marie, you listen to me. Meredith is family. Family helps family. This is a simple favor that would take a few hours at most, but you're too wrapped up in your own self-importance to see how your refusal affects everyone else. You're right. Meredith is family. So is Ethan. He's your grandson, in case you've forgotten. And right now, he needs medical attention more than Meredith needs eyeshadow. That's not the point, and you know it. The point is you've never been willing to make sacrifices for your sister. You've always put your own needs first, and now you're using that poor child as a shield for your selfishness. The casual dismissal of my son as a prop in my supposed selfishness sent white-hot anger coursing through me. I took a breath, trying to maintain some semblance of composure for Ethan's sake. I'm taking my son to the doctor now. If you have a problem with that, it says far more about you than it does about me. Your father wants to talk to you. There was rustling as the phone changed hands. And then my father's voice came through, harder and colder than before. You have 30 minutes to get to this house and take your sister to the mall. If you don't, there will be consequences. Consequences? I'm a 32-year-old woman with my own child and my own life. What consequences could you possibly impose? We've supported you plenty over the years, despite your poor choices. That support can disappear just as easily as it appeared. The threat was empty. We both knew it. They had never meaningfully supported me financially, and the few times they had helped, it came with strings and conditions that made the assistance barely worth the psychological cost. But the fact that he would weaponize their minimal involvement in my life while I was literally on the way to an emergency medical appointment spoke volumes about their priorities. Do whatever you need to do, Dad. I have a sick child who needs me. I ended the call and turned off my phone entirely, unwilling to deal with any more manipulation while trying to navigate traffic and care for Ethan. We made it to the pediatrician's office with 10 minutes to spare. Ethan was lethargic and warm, his breathing slightly labored as I carried him inside. The waiting room had a few other children, and I checked us in quickly, providing the receptionist with our insurance information and filling out the preliminary paperwork about his symptoms. We were called back within 15 minutes, and the nurse took Ethan's vitals while I explained the progression of his illness. His temperature was 101.8. His oxygen saturation was slightly low at 94%, and his heart rate was elevated. The nurse's expression grew serious as she listened to his breathing with a stethoscope, noting the wheezing and crackles that I had been hearing for the past day. "The doctor will be right in," she said, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did the right thing bringing him in today." Those words, simple and straightforward, nearly brought me to tears. After hours of being told I was overreacting, being selfish, being dramatic, having a medical professional validate my maternal instincts felt like a lifeline. Dr. Patterson entered the exam room 5 minutes later, a kind woman in her 50s who had been Ethan's pediatrician since he was 6 months old. She had seen us through ear infections, growth spurts, and the normal chaos of early childhood. And I trusted her completely. She examined Ethan thoroughly, listening to his lungs, checking his throat, palpating his lymph nodes. Her expression grew increasingly concerned as the examination progressed. "I'm hearing significant congestion in his lungs," she said finally, helping Ethan sit up and offering him a sticker, which he took listlessly. "Combined with the fever duration and his oxygen levels, I'm very concerned about pneumonia. I want to send you directly to the Children's Hospital for a chest X-ray and more comprehensive evaluation. He may need to be admitted." My heart sank even as I nodded in agreement. "What do I need to do?" "I'm going to call ahead and let them know you're coming." She was already pulling out her phone. "They'll have a bed ready in the pediatric unit if admission is necessary. This is the right hospital to take him to. They have an excellent pediatric respiratory team. Do you have someone who can meet you there? Support system?" I hesitated, thinking of my family and their utter disregard for Ethan's well-being. "I'll be fine on my own. We've managed this far." Dr. Patterson looked at me with compassion and understanding that suggested she had seen plenty of single parents navigating medical crises alone. "You're a good mother, Sophia. Trust your instincts and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." 20 minutes later, I was driving to the Children's Hospital, following the directions on my phone while Ethan dozed in his car seat. The hospital was 45 minutes away in good traffic, and I fought back panic as I navigated the highway, checking my rearview mirror constantly to make sure he was still breathing steadily. I had turned my phone back on to use the GPS, and it immediately lit up with notifications. 7 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, a dozen texts from Meredith, ranging from angry to manipulative to playing victim. I ignored all of them. My entire world narrowed to getting my son the care he needed. The Children's Hospital was a sprawling facility with colorful murals and a dedicated pediatric emergency entrance. I pulled up to the drop-off area, gathered Ethan into my arms, and hurried inside where a nurse was waiting with a wheelchair. We were expedited through triage thanks to Dr. Patterson's call, and within 30 minutes, Ethan was in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, receiving oxygen through a nasal cannula, and being prepared for chest X-rays. The next several hours blurred together in the way that medical emergencies do. X-rays confirmed bilateral pneumonia, meaning both lungs were affected. Ethan's oxygen saturation had dropped to 91%, low enough to require supplemental oxygen and close monitoring. He was officially admitted to the pediatric unit, started on intravenous antibiotics, and settled into a room with cheerful wall decorations that did nothing to ease my growing anxiety. The respiratory therapist visited every few hours to assess his breathing and adjust his oxygen levels. Nurses checked his vitals constantly. Doctors consulted about his treatment plan. And through it all, I sat by his bedside, holding his small hand, reading him stories when he was awake enough to listen, and fighting waves of exhaustion and fear. My phone continued to buzz with messages from my family, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My sister's shopping trip seemed to exist in an alternate universe, one where children's health crises were inconvenient rather than terrifying, where maternal instincts could be dismissed in favor of social media content. where family meant something entirely different than what I was experiencing in this hospital room. Around 7 that evening, a nurse brought me a sandwich and coffee, gently insisting I eat something. Ethan was sleeping, his breathing somewhat easier with the oxygen support, his fever finally starting to break under the assault of antibiotics. "You should try to rest too," the nurse said kindly. "We'll monitor him closely. If anything changes, we'll wake you immediately." I dozed fitfully in the chair beside Ethan's bed, my phone clutched in one hand in case the doctors needed to reach me. At some point during the night, I woke to find a text message from Meredith that made my blood run cold with its sheer obliviousness. "Thanks for nothing, sis. I had to take an Uber to the mall and it cost me $60 round trip. Plus, I missed the best deals because I got there late. Mum and Dad are really disappointed in you. Hope you're happy with yourself." I stared at the message in the dim light of the hospital room, listening to the steady beep of Ethan's monitors, watching the rise and fall of his small chest as he breathed oxygen-supplemented air. And something fundamental shifted inside me. The scales that had been weighted against me my entire life suddenly balanced, and I saw my family with brutal clarity. They didn't love me less than Meredith. Love wasn't even part of the equation. I was simply less valuable to them, less interesting, less worthy of investment or consideration. My struggles were boring, my accomplishments unremarkable, my child an afterthought in their hierarchy of priorities. And I was done. Completely, irrevocably done. I didn't respond to Meredith's message. I didn't respond to any of the accumulated texts and voicemails. I sat in that hospital chair and made a decision that had been decades in the making. Whatever relationship I had maintained with my parents and sister out of obligation, out of hope for change, out of some fundamental need for family connection, it was over. They had shown me repeatedly who they were and what I meant to them. Believing anything would change was not hope. It was delusion. And I owed it to my son to stop deluding myself. Ethan spent 3 days in the hospital. The pneumonia was severe enough to require close monitoring and continued oxygen support. Though he responded well to the antibiotics and his condition steadily improved. I barely left his side, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair, eating hospital cafeteria food, reading him endless stories, and playing quiet games when he felt well enough. The nursing staff was compassionate and supportive, bringing me coffee and snacks, checking on my well-being as well as Ethan's, treating us both with a kindness that threw my family's behavior into even sharper relief. On the second day, my father showed up unannounced at the hospital. I was helping Ethan with lunch, carefully spooning applesauce into his mouth as he sat propped against pillows, when my father appeared in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable and out of place in the pediatric unit. His usual commanding presence diminished somehow in the face of actual consequence. "Sophia, we need to talk." He didn't ask how Ethan was doing, didn't acknowledge his grandson at all. "Not now," I said quietly, setting down the applesauce. "Ethan is eating. This can't wait. Your mother and I have been trying to reach you for days. You've ignored every attempt at communication, because I've been caring for my son who has pneumonia. The condition I told you about before you demanded I abandon him to drive Meredith shopping." He waved a hand dismissively. "You're being dramatic. Kids get pneumonia all the time. It's not life-threatening. The doctor said if I had waited even one more day to bring him in, it could have become life-threatening." His oxygen saturation was dangerously low. He needed immediate hospitalization. But you thought makeup shopping was more important. I kept my voice low and controlled, aware of Ethan watching us with wide, uncertain eyes. That's not what this is about, and you know it. This is about you refusing to help your sister when she needed you. About you prioritizing your own convenience over family obligations. My voice hardened despite my efforts to stay calm. Get out. Excuse me? My father's face reddened. I said, get out. Leave this room immediately and don't come back. You don't get to speak to me that way, young lady. I'm your father, and he is my son. I pointed at Ethan. The child you just dismissed as dramatic, whose serious illness you've characterized as an inconvenience. You have no right to be here, and I want you gone, now. Before he could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway, clearly having heard at least part of our exchange. Is everything all right here? Miss Cooper, do you want this visitor to leave? Yes, I said firmly. He's leaving now. My father looked between us, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and something that might have been embarrassment. This isn't over, Sophia. You can't just cut us out of your life because you're having a tantrum. Watch me. The nurse stepped aside to let him pass, her hand resting pointedly on the phone at her hip, the implication clear. If he didn't leave voluntarily, security would be called. He stalked out without another word, and I turned back to Ethan, forcing my hands to stop shaking as I picked up the applesauce again. The nurse lingered for a moment. Are you okay? Do you need me to put a note in his chart about approved visitors? That would be helpful. Thank you. I managed a grateful smile. Only I'm approved to visit. No one else. She nodded with understanding and sympathy. I'll make sure everyone on staff knows. Your focus should be on your little one, not dealing with family drama. After she left, Ethan looked up at me with confusion in his fevered eyes. Why was Grandpa mad, Mama? He wasn't mad, baby. He was just leaving. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart. We're not in trouble at all. I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, feeling the heat still radiating from his skin despite the medications. We're exactly where we need to be, doing exactly what we need to do. He seemed satisfied with that answer, returning his attention to his applesauce. But I sat there for a long time after he finished eating, watching him drift back to sleep, thinking about boundaries and consequences, and the family I was choosing to protect by removing the family I had been born into. That afternoon, I finally responded to my accumulated messages with a single group text to my parents and sister. Ethan has pneumonia and has been hospitalized for 3 days. The doctors say if I had waited even a day longer to bring him in, the outcome could have been much worse. I will not be responding to any further communication from any of you. Do not contact me. Do not come to the hospital. Do not attempt to visit us when we're discharged. I need time and space to focus on my son's health and our future without your interference. Consider this a permanent boundary until and unless I decide otherwise. My mother responded within minutes. You're overreacting, Sophia. Family fights happen. We can work through this. But I had already muted the conversation. There was nothing to work through, no middle ground to negotiate. They had shown me who they were in the starkest possible terms, and I finally believed them. Ethan was discharged on the 4th day with a prescription for oral antibiotics, instructions for breathing treatments, and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. I packed our belongings, thanked the nursing staff profusely, and carried my son out to the car, feeling simultaneously exhausted and strangely liberated. The world looked different somehow, sharper and clearer, as if removing my family's distorting influence had improved my vision. We went home to our small apartment, and I settled Ethan on the couch with his favorite blankets and cartoons, while I prepared his medications and organized the medical equipment we would need for his recovery. My phone remained mercifully quiet for the rest of that day. My family apparently taking my message seriously for once. I should have known the peace wouldn't last. 2 days after we came home from the hospital, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock while I was giving Ethan a breathing treatment, and I ignored it, assuming it was a package delivery. The knocking persisted, growing more insistent, until I finally went to the door and looked through the peephole. My mother stood there, arms crossed, face set in an expression of determined righteousness that I recognized all too well. I didn't open the door. "Mum, you need to leave." My voice was loud enough to carry through the door, but hopefully not loud enough to alarm Ethan in the living room. "I told you I need space. Open this door right now, Sophia. We need to discuss your behavior." "There's nothing to discuss. Please leave before I call the police." "The police? My own daughter is threatening to call the police on me. What has gotten into you? Respect for boundaries. Something I should have developed decades ago. Now, please leave." She didn't leave. Instead, she raised her voice loud enough that I worried the neighbors would hear. "You can't just cut us out of your life because you're upset. We're family. Family doesn't give up on each other. You gave up on me a long time ago," I replied, my own voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You gave up on Ethan the moment he was born. You've made it crystal clear that we don't matter to you except as tools to manipulate for Meredith's benefit. I will not subject my son to that dysfunction anymore." I heard her fumbling with something, and then my phone started ringing. A video call. I ignored it, but she persisted, calling again and again until I finally answered just to make her stop. Her face appeared on my screen, tear-streaked and furious. "How dare you speak to me this way? After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed." "What have you sacrificed, Mum? Please, enlighten me." "Because from where I'm standing, you've sacrificed nothing. You chose Meredith over me at every turn, and now you're choosing her over your grandson. That's not sacrifice. That's favoritism. And I'm done pretending it's anything else. You've always been jealous of your sister. Even as children, you resented her for being prettier, more talented, more likable. No, I resented being treated like I didn't matter. There's a difference. And you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not justifying my boundaries or explaining my decisions. You need to leave, and you need to stop contacting me." Through the phone screen, I saw her face transform from tears to cold fury. "You'll regret this, Sophia. When Meredith is successful and you're struggling alone with that child, you'll regret burning these bridges. I'd rather struggle alone than thrive while compromising my son's well-being and my own dignity. Goodbye, Mum." I ended the call and blocked her number immediately, then blocked my father and Meredith as well. The finality of it felt both terrifying and freeing, like jumping off a cliff while simultaneously growing wings. From the living room, Ethan called out that his breathing treatment was making a funny noise. I pocketed my phone and went to help him, pushing aside the emotional turmoil to focus on what mattered. My son was healing, we were safe, and for the first time in my life, I had set boundaries that actually held. The following weeks established a new normal for us. Ethan's pneumonia gradually resolved, his energy returning bit by bit until he was back to his usual rambunctious self. I threw myself into work, grateful for the flexibility of freelancing that allowed me to care for him while maintaining an income. We developed new routines, new traditions, new ways of being a family unit of two without the constant pressure of my birth family's dysfunction. But they didn't give up easily. Unable to contact me directly, they found other ways to make their displeasure known. My mother left messages with my landlord, asking him to check on me because she was worried about my mental health. My father showed up at my workplace, demanding to speak with my supervisor about my unprofessional behavior and trying to get me fired. Though thankfully my boss saw through his manipulation and asked him to leave. Meredith launched a campaign on social media, posting vague messages about toxic family members and the pain of being cut off by a jealous sibling. Her followers, not knowing the full story, flooded her comments with support and sympathy. I watched it all from a distance, protected by my blocks and boundaries, and felt nothing but pity for how desperately they needed to control a narrative that was no longer theirs to tell. The real test came 6 weeks after I had first set my boundaries, when I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 2 hours before I found the courage to open it, my hands shaking as I broke the seal and unfolded the legal documents inside. They were suing me for grandparents' rights, claiming I was unreasonably denying them access to their grandson and that my behavior constituted parental alienation. The complaint painted me as unstable, vindictive, and potentially unfit, using my refusal to prioritize Meredith's shopping trip as evidence of poor judgment and my decision to block them as proof of my instability. They wanted court-ordered visitation with Ethan, and they wanted me to pay their legal fees. I read through the complaint 3 times, my initial shock giving way to cold, calculated anger. They had pushed me to this point through years of favoritism and manipulation, had dismissed my son's medical emergency as inconvenient, had shown up at my home and workplace to harass me, and now they were trying to use the legal system to maintain control over my life. But they had made a crucial mistake. They had put everything in writing, created a paper trail of their own dysfunction that I could use against them. I hired a lawyer that same day, a family law specialist, who listened to my story with growing anger on my behalf. "We have a strong case," she assured me after I had shown her the timeline of events. The medical records from Ethan's hospitalization, the messages from my family dismissing his illness. Grandparents' rights cases are difficult to win under the best circumstances. And these are far from the best circumstances. They're going to have to prove that denying them access harms your son. And given that their access has always been minimal and conditional, that's going to be nearly impossible. "What do I need to do?" I asked, ready to fight with everything I had. Document everything. Every attempt at contact. Every manipulation, every boundary violation. We'll also want testimony from Ethan's doctors about the seriousness of his pneumonia and the appropriateness of your medical decisions. And we'll want to depose them about their parenting of you. establish the pattern of favoritism and emotional neglect. The depositions were scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving both sides time to prepare. I spent those weeks gathering evidence, compiling years of messages and emails and social media posts that demonstrated my family's favoritism, their dismissal of my needs, their minimal involvement in Ethan's life. My lawyer was thorough and relentless, building a case that painted my parents not as loving grandparents being unfairly denied access, but as manipulative individuals seeking to maintain control over their adult daughter through her child. The day of the depositions, I arrived at my lawyer's office early, my stomach churning with anxiety and anticipation. My parents arrived separately, my mother looking fragile and victimized, my father radiating barely controlled anger. Meredith came too, though she wasn't being deposed, apparently there for moral support. We were kept in separate rooms, but I could hear raised voices occasionally, filtering through the walls as my lawyer questioned them. When it was my turn to be deposed by their lawyer, I answered every question truthfully and calmly, refusing to be baited into emotional responses. Yes, I had cut off contact with my parents. Yes, I had blocked their phone numbers. Yes, I had denied them access to their grandson. And yes, I would do it all again without hesitation, because protecting my son from their toxic behavior was my primary responsibility as his mother. Their lawyer tried to paint my actions as vindictive, as an overreaction to a minor family disagreement. I calmly corrected him. This wasn't about a disagreement. This was about them demanding I cancel my son's emergency medical appointment to drive my sister shopping, then physically assaulting me when I refused. This was about years of favoritism and emotional neglect that I had finally stopped tolerating. Do you have proof of this alleged assault? The lawyer asked, clearly skeptical. I showed him the photos I had taken of the bruises on my back, where I had hit the wall, the damage to the wall itself, the timeline correlating with my father's visit. I also have testimony from the hospital staff who witnessed his behavior when he showed up during Ethan's admission. They documented his dismissal of his grandson's serious illness and my request that he be removed from the premises. The lawyer's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his confident facade. And you believe this justifies completely cutting them out of your grandson's life? I believe it justifies protecting my son from people who have demonstrated they don't value his well-being. If they wanted a relationship with him, they should have prioritized him when he was sick, instead of prioritizing my sister's shopping trip. The deposition lasted 3 hours, and I emerged drained but satisfied that I had represented myself and my decisions clearly. My lawyer pulled me aside afterward, her expression cautiously optimistic. They don't have a case. Their own testimony supports everything you've said about favoritism and minimal involvement. Your father particularly hurt them when he admitted he couldn't remember the last time he had spent one-on-one time with Ethan. What happens now? We wait for them to either drop the suit or proceed to trial. Based on what I heard today, I think they'll drop it. Taking this to court would only expose them further, and their lawyer has to know they're unlikely to win. She was right. 2 weeks later, my parents withdrew their lawsuit with no explanation, no apology, just a terse notice from their attorney that they were discontinuing their claim. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt a deep, aching sadness for what could have been if they had been different people. If they had been capable of the kind of love and support that grandparents should provide. But they weren't different people, and wishing wouldn't change that fundamental truth. Life moved forward. Ethan thrived without the confusing dynamic of grandparents who barely acknowledged his existence. I threw myself into my work and my role as his mother, building a life that was smaller but infinitely healthier than what we had before. We made new traditions, new memories, new definitions of family that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with mutual respect and genuine care. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my years of trying to manage my family's dysfunction. I joined a single-parent support group where I found community and understanding with others who were navigating similar challenges. I started therapy to work through the decades of emotional neglect and favoritism, slowly untangling the knots of unworthiness that had been tied so tightly in my psyche since childhood. And then, 8 months after I had walked away from my family, everything changed in a way I could never have anticipated. I was working at my desk one afternoon while Ethan played in his room when I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read important information about your family, and I nearly deleted it as a spam before something made me open it instead. The email was from Meredith. Not her usual email address that I had blocked, but a new one created specifically to reach me. The message was long and rambling, but the core of it made my blood run cold. Sophia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but you need to know what's happening. Mom and Dad are in serious trouble. Financial trouble. The kind that involves investigations and potential criminal charges. I've been trying to figure out what's going on, and I think you should know that it involves you. I stared at the screen, my heart rate accelerating. The email continued with details that became increasingly disturbing. Apparently, my parents had been using my identity for years to open credit cards, take out loans, and accumulate debt in my name. The total amount exceeded $100,000, and it had all been used to fund Meredith's lifestyle and their own spending. Meredith claimed she had no idea until recently, when creditors started calling her asking about accounts she didn't recognize. She had done some investigating and discovered the extent of the fraud, which had been going on since I was in college. I felt physically ill reading her words. Identity theft, financial fraud, criminal activity perpetrated by my own parents, using my name and credit to fund the very favoritism that had defined my entire life. The sister who had been showered with advantages had been given them with money stolen from me, and she hadn't even known to question where it all came from. Meredith's email ended with an apology that felt both sincere and inadequate. I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry I didn't see what they were doing. I'm sorry I didn't question why I always got everything while you got nothing. I'm sorry I believed their version of you as jealous and difficult instead of seeing the truth. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but you deserve to know what they did. And you should probably check your credit report. I sat frozen at my desk for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I pulled up my credit report for the first time in years, having been too overwhelmed with single parenthood to monitor it regularly. What I saw made my stomach drop. Dozens of accounts I had never opened. Maxed out credit cards, collections notices, missed payments. My credit score was in the low 400s, destroyed by debt I had never incurred. The timeline was exactly as Meredith had described. Starting when I was in college and continuing right up until I had cut off contact 8 months ago. Every major purchase Meredith had ever made, her car, her camera equipment, her trips, her designer clothes. They had all been funded with my stolen identity. Every time my parents had claimed they couldn't afford to help me with tuition or rent or basic necessities, they had been lying because they were already spending my credit on my sister. The betrayal was so complete, so systematic, that I couldn't even process the full scope of it. I called my lawyer immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. She listened to my explanation with professional calm that barely masked her fury. "This is serious fraud, Sophia. Federal crimes. You need to file a police report immediately, and we need to freeze your credit and start the process of disputing these fraudulent accounts. But my parents, they'll go to jail." Her voice softened slightly. "That's a consequence of their choices, not yours. They stole your identity and destroyed your financial future to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. That's not something you can or should protect them from." I knew she was right, but years of conditioning made the decision agonizing. These were my parents, flawed and harmful, but still my parents. Could I really be the one to send them to prison? Then I thought of Ethan, of the future I was trying to build for us, of the student loans I had struggled to pay while they were living large on my credit. I thought of every time they had told me money was tight, every sacrifice I had made believing we were genuinely struggling financially, every opportunity I had missed because I couldn't afford it while they were spending money stolen from me. And I thought of that moment when my father's hands had pushed me against the wall, when he had told me my son's health didn't matter compared to Meredith's shopping trip. And I knew what I had to do. I filed the police report that evening, providing all the documentation I had gathered, all the evidence of accounts opened in my name without my consent. The detective assigned to my case was sympathetic and thorough, explaining that identity theft cases involving family members were unfortunately common, but often went unreported, because victims felt guilty about prosecuting their own relatives. "You shouldn't feel guilty," he told me firmly. "What they did is a crime, and it's had a serious impact on your life. Filing this report is about protecting yourself and your son, not about revenge." Within a week, investigators had confirmed the extent of the fraud. My parents had opened 17 credit cards in my name, taken out 2 personal loans, and even attempted to take out a home equity loan using forged documents. The total debt exceeded $130,000. And my credit had been so thoroughly destroyed that I would have been unable to rent an apartment, buy a car, or access any kind of credit for years without clearing my name. The day the police arrested my parents was surreal. I wasn't there to witness it, but Meredith called me from yet another new number, her voice thick with tears. "They came this morning. Took them both in handcuffs. Mum was crying, and Dad was shouting about how this is all your fault, how you've destroyed the family." I listened without speaking, feeling nothing but a strange detachment. "How are you doing?" I asked finally. I don't know. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. They built it all on fraud and stolen identity, and I never questioned any of it. I should have known something was wrong. "You were a kid for most of it," I pointed out, echoing what I had told myself when the guilt threatened to overwhelm me. "They conditioned you to accept their version of reality. What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "Now they face consequences for their actions, and we both figure out how to move forward. Can I see you? I need to talk to someone who understands." I hesitated, Years of resentment and hurt, warring with the recognition that Meredith was as much a victim of our parents' dysfunction as I was, just in a different way. She had been raised to be entitled and oblivious, given everything while being taught to expect it as her due. That wasn't her fault, but it also didn't obligate me to comfort her through the consequences. "I don't think I'm ready for that yet," I said finally. "I need more time to process everything. But I appreciate you telling me about the fraud. You could have stayed silent." "I thought about it," she admitted. "It would have been easier to just let you keep believing they only emotionally neglected you. But you deserve to know the full truth, even if it makes everything worse." We ended the call with tentative promises to maybe talk again sometime, both of us aware that our relationship had been fundamentally altered by the revelations of the past months. She was no longer the favored princess, and I was no longer the forgotten daughter. We were just two women trying to make sense of the wreckage our parents had created. The criminal case proceeded quickly. My parents initially tried to fight the charges, claiming they had only been trying to help the family, that I had given them permission to use my credit. That this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by my vindictiveness. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures on credit applications. Accounts opened using my social security number while I was living in a different state. Purchases that aligned perfectly with Meredith's social media posts about her new possessions. There was no defense that could explain away the systematic fraud they had committed over more than a decade. Their lawyer eventually advised them to take a plea deal. My father was offered 3 years in federal prison with restitution requirements. My mother was offered 18 months with supervised probation afterward. They had 48 hours to decide whether to accept or proceed to trial, where they would almost certainly face longer sentences. The day before their deadline, my mother called me from yet another new number I hadn't blocked yet. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity about what she could possibly say at this point. "Sophia, please." Her voice was desperate and broken. "You have to drop the charges. We'll lose everything. The house, our savings, our freedom. Please, you can't do this to us." "I didn't do anything to you," I said calmly. "You did this to yourselves when you stole my identity and destroyed my credit to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. We were trying to give Meredith opportunities you never took advantage of. We were investing in her future. With my stolen identity and my destroyed credit, that's not investing, Mom. That's fraud." She was crying now. Ugly, desperate sobs. "We're your parents. You can't send us to prison. We raised you. You fed and clothed me, yes. That's the legal minimum. It doesn't give you the right to commit federal crimes using my identity. But I couldn't let Meredith struggle the way you did." I made a bitter sound. "I struggled because you made sure I struggled. While I was working 3 jobs to pay for college, you were using my credit to buy Meredith designer clothes. While I was eating ramen to make rent, you were using my credit to send her on vacation. You created my struggle to fund her ease, and you did it with money stolen from me. We thought we could pay it back before you ever found out." She was grasping at straws now, trying to find any justification that would make this okay. "We were going to fix it before it affected you. You had 13 years to fix it, and you didn't. You just kept stealing more and more, destroying my financial future more and more, all while telling me you couldn't afford to help me with basic necessities. Please, Sophia, I'm begging you." We'll do anything. Drop the charges and we'll make this right. You'll make it right by accepting the plea deal and taking responsibility for what you've done. That's the only way forward now. But prison, she whispered. I can't go to prison. You'll probably serve less than a year with good behavior. I've served a lifetime sentence of feeling worthless and forgotten. I think you can manage. The parallel silenced her for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed from desperate to cold. You've always been vindictive and cruel. This just proves it. We tried our best with you, but some people are just born damaged. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call and blocked the number. My hands shaking but my resolve firm. Her final words had been meant to wound, to make me doubt myself and my decisions. Instead, they had only confirmed that I was right to protect myself and Ethan from people who would never take responsibility for their actions, who would always find a way to make themselves the victims, even when confronted with evidence of their crimes. They took the plea deal. My father was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, and my mother to 18 months, with both required to pay full restitution of $130,000, plus penalties and interest. The house was sold to begin covering the debt. Their remaining assets were liquidated. Their comfortable lifestyle was dismantled piece by piece, consequence by consequence. And through it all, they maintained they were the victims, that I was cruel and vindictive, that they had only been trying to help their family. Meredith lost everything too, though she hadn't committed any crimes. The apartment she had been renting with money from my parents' fraud was gone when they could no longer pay. The car purchased on my stolen credit was repossessed. The camera equipment, the designer clothes, the lifestyle she had built on my unknowing sacrifice, all of it disappeared. She moved into a small studio apartment and got a full-time job at a retail store, finally experiencing the kind of financial struggle I had lived with my entire adult life. She reached out occasionally, her messages a mixture of apology and bewilderment at how quickly her life had fallen apart. I responded sometimes, maintaining a cordial but distant connection, not quite ready to forgive, but no longer actively angry. She hadn't known about the fraud, and she was facing her own reckoning with the reality of who our parents were and what they had done. That was punishment enough without me adding to it. A year after my parents began serving their sentences, I had finally cleared most of the fraudulent debt from my credit report. It was a long, frustrating process involving countless hours on the phone with creditors, filing disputes, providing documentation. But gradually, account by account, my credit began to recover. The marks would stay on my report for years, but at least they were correctly labeled as fraud rather than legitimate debt. My credit score climbed back into the high 600s. Not perfect, but functional. Enough to qualify for a car loan when my old sedan finally died. Enough to move Ethan and me into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood with good schools. Enough to start building the financial stability that should have been mine all along if my own parents hadn't systematically destroyed it. Ethan thrived without the confusing presence of grandparents who had never really valued him. He made friends in our new neighborhood, excelled in kindergarten, showed no signs of trauma from the upheaval of the previous year. Children are resilient, his teacher told me during a parent conference. And he's clearly got a strong foundation at home. Single parent or not, you're doing an excellent job. Those words meant more to me than she could know. Validation from a neutral party that I was enough, that Ethan was flourishing under my care alone, that we didn't need my parents or their dysfunction to be a healthy, happy family. I dated occasionally, though mostly I focused on work and Ethan and slowly rebuilding the life my parents had undermined. I made actual friends, not just casual acquaintances, people who showed up when I needed help and accepted help in return. Reciprocal relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The single parent support group became a lifeline, a community of people who understood the challenges and rewards of raising children alone, who offered practical advice and emotional support without judgment. I had been attending for 6 months when I first mentioned my family situation. The full story of favoritism and fraud, and the decision to cut them off completely. I expected judgment, maybe accusations that I was being too harsh, that family should forgive. Instead, I received understanding and even admiration for setting such clear boundaries. You protected your child, one mother said firmly. That's what we're supposed to do, even when it's hard, even when it means cutting off toxic family members. Through therapy, I began to understand the full scope of how my parents' favoritism had shaped me. The constant message that I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of investment, wasn't as valuable as my sister had created deep patterns of self-doubt and people-pleasing that extended far beyond my family. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love, and approval that should have been freely given, and the exhaustion of that endless effort had nearly broken me. Learning to recognize my inherent worth, independent of anyone else's validation, was harder than I expected. But slowly, session by session, I began to internalize a new narrative. I was enough. I had always been enough. My parents' failure to see that said everything about them and nothing about me. 2 years after cutting off contact with my parents, I received an unexpected letter. Not from them. They were prohibited from contacting me as part of their plea agreements, but from a lawyer representing my father's mother, my grandmother. I hadn't seen her in years, not since I was a teenager. She lived across the country, and we had lost touch as I focused on surviving my own life. The letter was formal but kind, explaining that my grandmother had recently learned the full story of what had happened with my parents and the fraud they had committed. She was horrified and wanted to reach out, to apologize for not being more present in my life, to see if there was any way to make amends for her son's actions. She included her contact information and a request that if I was willing, I consider allowing her to meet her great-grandson. I sat with the letter for a week, turning it over in my mind, discussing it with my therapist and the friends I had come to trust. Meeting her felt risky, like opening a door I had worked so hard to close. But it also felt potentially redemptive. The possibility of family connection without the toxicity that had defined my relationship with my parents. I called her finally, my heart pounding as the phone rang. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and slightly tremulous. Sophia. Oh, my dear, I'm so glad you called. We talked for 2 hours that first conversation. She asked about Ethan, about my life, about how I was managing. She listened without judgment as I explained everything that had happened. The favoritism, the assault, the identity theft, the decision to prosecute. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. I failed you, she said finally. I knew my son had his flaws. But I never imagined he would do something like this to his own daughter. I should have been more involved. I should have seen what was happening and intervened. You were across the country with your own life, I pointed out. You can't blame yourself for not seeing something they worked hard to hide. Perhaps, but I'm seeing clearly now. And I'd like to be part of your life and Ethan's life if you'll allow it. Not to replace what you lost, but to offer what I should have been providing all along. We started slowly. Phone calls every week, video chats so she could see Ethan and he could get to know his great-grandmother. She sent thoughtful gifts for his birthday and holidays, not expensive or excessive, just carefully chosen items that showed she was paying attention to his interests and personality. After 6 months of regular contact, she flew out to visit us, spending a week in a nearby hotel and seeing us every day. I watched carefully for any signs of the dysfunction that had defined my relationship with my parents. Any favoritism or manipulation or conditional affection. But she was genuinely kind and present, interested in both of us as individuals, respectful of my boundaries and my role as Ethan's mother. One afternoon during her visit, while Ethan was napping, she and I sat on my apartment balcony drinking coffee and watching the clouds drift by. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice serious. When I found out what my son had done, I was devastated. But I was also angry at myself for not teaching him better. His father and I divorced when he was young, and I was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I missed things I should have caught. I let him get away with behaviors I should have corrected because I was too tired, too overwhelmed. "You did your best in a difficult situation," I said, meaning it. "Just like I'm doing now." She nodded slowly. "But unlike me, you recognized when you needed to make a hard choice to protect your child. You broke the cycle, Sophia. That takes tremendous courage." I felt tears prick my eyes. It didn't feel courageous. It felt terrifying and painful and like I was failing at being a daughter. "You weren't failing," she said firmly. "They were failing at being parents. And by protecting Ethan from their dysfunction, you gave him something precious. The chance to grow up knowing his worth isn't conditional, that love doesn't come with strings attached, that he deserves to be prioritized and valued. That's the greatest gift you could give him." Her presence in our lives became a source of unexpected healing. She was proof that family could be healthy and supportive, that generational patterns could be broken, that it was possible to have connections based on genuine care rather than obligation or manipulation. Ethan adored her, and she doted on him with the kind of straightforward, uncomplicated love that grandparents should provide. 3 years after cutting off my parents, Meredith asked to meet for coffee. We had maintained sporadic text contact, mostly around holiday and birthdays. But we hadn't seen each other face to face since everything had imploded. I was hesitant, but curious, wondering what she wanted to discuss that required an in-person conversation. We met at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our apartments. She looked different than I remembered, less polished and put together, her hair in a simple ponytail rather than the elaborate styles she used to maintain for her social media. She wore jeans and a plain sweater instead of the designer outfits. The change was striking. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, after we had ordered and found a quiet corner table. "I know I don't have any right to ask for your time. You asked, and I said yes. I'm here because I chose to be, not because I owe you anything. Fair enough. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. I wanted to apologize properly, not through text or email, but face to face. I've been in therapy for the past year, working through everything, and my therapist said I needed to make amends where possible. I appreciate that, but you should know I'm not ready to just forgive and move on. What they did, what you benefited from even unknowingly, it fundamentally changed my life. It destroyed my credit, limited my opportunities, forced me to struggle unnecessarily while you lived comfortably on my stolen identity. I know. Her voice was small but steady. I know. And I can't imagine how that feels. I've spent the last 2 years experiencing a fraction of the struggle you dealt with your entire life. And it's been the hardest thing I've ever done. Working full-time just to make rent. Budgeting for groceries. Having to save for months to afford something I used to buy without thinking. And knowing that you dealt with all of this while I was posting Instagram photos of my latest shopping haul purchased with your stolen credit makes me sick. What do you want from me, Meredith? I asked, not unkindly. An absolution. Permission to stop feeling guilty. I don't know if I can give you that. I don't want absolution. I just want you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong it all was. How they twisted us both into dysfunctional roles. How they made you the forgotten one, and me the favored one. And neither of us benefited from it in any real way. You benefited materially, I pointed out. Cars, clothes, travel, education paid for with my stolen credit. That's not nothing. No, it's not nothing, she agreed. But it came at a cost too, just a different kind. They raised me to be entitled and useless, to think my value came from my appearance and my online following, to expect everything to be handed to me without effort. When it all fell apart, I had no skills to fall back on, no resilience, no understanding of how to function as an independent adult. She paused, looking down at her coffee. I'm not saying my struggle is equivalent to yours. It's not even close. I'm just saying that their dysfunction hurt both of us. And I'm sorry I didn't see it soon enough to stand up for you when you needed it. We talked for 2 more hours, working through years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. Meredith told me about her current life, the retail job that exhausted her, the tiny studio apartment that was all she could afford, the humbling experience of building a life without the financial support she had taken for granted. I told her about Ethan, about our grandmother's presence in our lives, about the slow process of healing and rebuilding. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start, a tentative bridge being built between 2 women who had both been damaged by the same dysfunctional family system in different ways. As we parted ways, Meredith hesitated. Would it be okay if I reached out again? Maybe we could do this again sometime. I considered the question carefully. I think so. But slowly. I need to be sure this is real and not just temporary, guilt-driven remorse. I understand. And Sophia, I want you to know that watching you stand up to them, set boundaries, protect Ethan, it showed me what strength actually looks like. Everything I thought mattered, the followers, the likes, the image, it was all superficial. But what you did, protecting your child even when it cost you your family, that's real. That matters. I drove home that afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in years, not because everything was resolved, but because I could see a path forward that included the possibility of healthy family relationships, carefully chosen and cautiously built. The 4th year after cutting off my parents brought unexpected developments. My mother completed her prison sentence and was released on supervised probation. She immediately tried to contact me through various means. Letters sent to my workplace, messages passed through distant relatives, attempts to show up at Ethan's school. Each attempt was documented and reported to her probation officer, each one a violation of the no-contact order that was part of her plea agreement. After the 3rd violation, she was called before a judge who made it explicitly clear that any further attempts to contact me would result in her probation being revoked and additional prison time being added. She stopped after that, though I heard through Meredith that she spent considerable time and energy painting herself as the victim, a loving mother cruelly cut off from her daughter and grandson by vindictiveness and spite. My father still had a year left on his sentence, and I had no idea if he would respect the no-contact order once released. Part of me wanted to believe he would, that prison had given him time to reflect and recognize the harm he had caused. But a larger, more realistic part knew that people like my father rarely changed in any fundamental way. He would likely spend the rest of his life believing he had been wronged, that his crimes were justified, that I was the villain in a story where he was the tragic hero. I made peace with never having the closure of their acknowledgement or apology. Some things couldn't be fixed or healed, only accepted and moved past. And I was moving past them, building a life defined by my choices rather than their dysfunction. Ethan started 1st grade that fall, a bright and confident child who knew nothing of the family drama that had defined his early years. When his class did a family tree project, he drew me, himself, and his great-grandmother without any sense that something was missing. The gaps in his tree weren't losses to him because he had never known those relationships to exist. To him, this was simply what family looked like. Around the same time, I met someone. Not through dating apps or setups, but organically through the single-parent support group. Marcus was a widower raising his 6-year-old daughter Emma alone, and we bonded initially over the shared challenges of single parenthood. Solely, cautiously, that friendship evolved into something more. He knew my history because I had shared it in the group meetings, and he never pressured me to reconcile with my family or questioned my boundaries. He understood that protecting our children came first, and that sometimes that meant making hard choices about who got access to their lives. Our relationship developed slowly, prioritizing the children and their comfort at every stage. Ethan and Emma became fast friends, which made the adults' growing connection feel natural and right. 6 months into dating, Marcus met my grandmother during one of her visits. I had been nervous about the introduction, worried she might disapprove or question the relationship. Instead, she pulled me aside after dinner and told me she was happy to see me building a life with someone who clearly respected and valued me. "He's good for you," she observed. "And more importantly, you're good together. You're building something healthy and equal, not repeating the patterns of your past." A year into our relationship, Marcus and I started discussing the future. Neither of us was in a rush to marry, both having been through enough relationship trauma to know that time and care mattered more than speed. But we talked about moving in together eventually, about blending our families in a way that honored both children's needs, about building a life partnership based on mutual respect and support. "You know what I love about us?" Marcus said one evening as we sat on my couch after putting both kids to bed. "We both know what we don't want in a relationship, what dysfunction looks like, what red flags to watch for. We've both done the work to heal and grow. That makes what we're building so much stronger because we're choosing it consciously, not just falling into it." I thought about my parents' relationship, defined by enabling and dysfunction, neither of them willing to confront the toxic patterns they perpetuated. I thought about my failed marriage, rushed into too young and too naively, destined to fail because neither of us had known who we really were or what we needed. And I looked at what Marcus and I were creating, built on honesty and respect and the shared commitment to do better, be better for ourselves and our children. "This is what family should feel like," I said, leaning against him, safe and supportive and equal. The 5th anniversary of cutting off my parents arrived without fanfare. It had been 5 years since that moment when my father pushed me against the wall and told me my son didn't matter. 5 years since I had walked out of their house and their lives, choosing my child's well-being over their dysfunction. In those 5 years, I had filed charges that sent them to prison. I had cleared my credit of their fraudulent debt. I had built a career and a home and a life that was entirely my own. I had found healthy family connections with my grandmother and tentatively with Meredith. I had fallen in love with a man who valued me and treated me as an equal partner. And Ethan had grown into a happy, healthy 6-year-old who had never known anything but being prioritized and valued. Sometimes I wondered what my parents thought about now, whether they ever truly understood the scope of what they had done and what they had lost. My mother was out of prison, living in a small apartment and working a minimum wage job to cover her restitution payments. My father was due for release in 6 months, facing a similar future of diminished circumstances and ongoing financial consequences. They had lost their home, their savings, their comfortable retirement, their relationship with their daughter and grandson. And for what? To fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and favoritism that had ultimately hurt both their children. I didn't hate them anymore. That was perhaps the most surprising development of the past 5 years. The sharp edge of anger and hurt had dulled into something closer to pity and detachment. They were small people, damaged by their own dysfunctions and incapable of the self-reflection that might have allowed them to change. That wasn't my fault or my responsibility to fix. One afternoon, I received a letter from my father, not mailed directly to me, which would have violated his no-contact order, but sent through his lawyer and forwarded through my lawyer to ensure compliance with legal restrictions. My lawyer called me when it arrived. "He's allowed to send one communication through proper channels. You don't have to read it or respond, but I thought you should know it exists." I picked up the letter from her office that evening, the envelope heavy in my hands. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before opening it, steeling myself for whatever it contained. The letter was 6 pages long, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper. My father's familiar cramped handwriting filled each page with words that I read with growing detachment. He apologized in his way, said he understood now that what they had done was wrong, that he had let his need to provide for Meredith cloud his judgment about appropriate means. He claimed he had spent his time in prison reflecting, attending counseling, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. But even in his apology, he couldn't quite take full responsibility. He blamed financial stress, society's emphasis on material success, his own father's emotional distance. He painted himself as a flawed man who made mistakes trying to do his best in difficult circumstances. He asked for forgiveness, for the chance to meet his grandson, for the opportunity to prove he had changed. The last line read, "When I'm released, I hope you can find it in your heart to give me a chance to be the father I should have been and the grandfather Ethan deserves." I read the letter 3 times, analyzing each sentence for genuine accountability and finding it consistently absent. He was sorry he got caught, sorry he faced consequences, sorry he had lost his comfortable life. But he wasn't truly sorry for the harm he had caused, for the systematic favoritism, for the identity theft, for the years of emotional neglect. If he had been, he would have found a way to take full responsibility without the qualifications and justifications that peppered every paragraph. I took the letter home and showed it to Marcus, to my grandmother, to my therapist. Each of them read it with similar conclusions. This was not the letter of someone who had truly changed, but someone who wanted to bypass consequences and return to some version of the relationship that existed before, where he held power and I accommodated his dysfunction. My therapist put it most succinctly. He wants access without accountability. He wants you to forgive without him having to fully acknowledge the harm. That's not how healing works, and you're under no obligation to accept it. I drafted a response that took me 3 days to write, each word carefully chosen to be clear and final. I sent it through my lawyer to maintain the legal boundaries that protected me. Dad, I received your letter and I appreciate that you took the time to write it. However, I'm not able to offer you what you're asking for. An apology that includes justifications and excuses isn't a real apology. Taking responsibility means accepting full accountability without blaming circumstances or other people. And your letter doesn't do that. More importantly, even if you had taken full responsibility, I'm not obligated to forgive or reconcile. What you and Mum did caused serious lasting harm. The identity theft damaged my credit and financial stability for years. The favoritism created deep psychological wounds I'm still healing from. The physical assault crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And most significantly, your willingness to prioritize Meredith's shopping over Ethan's medical emergency showed me that you're not capable of being the grandfather he deserves. I've built a good life for my son and myself, surrounded by people who respect boundaries, practice genuine accountability, and prioritize our well-being. We're happy and healthy, and I won't risk that stability by allowing you back into our lives. I wish you well in your continued personal growth, but that growth needs to happen independent of me. Please respect my decision and do not attempt to contact me again after your release. Any future attempts at contact will be documented and or reported as violations of the no contact order. Take care of yourself, Sophia. I didn't know if he would respect my wishes, but I had made my position clear. Whether he chose to accept it was his decision, and any consequences of violating it would be his responsibility. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called with news. Your father's attorney has confirmed he won't contest the permanent no-contact order. He's agreed to stay away from you and your son indefinitely. I felt a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lift from my shoulders. It's really over. It's really over. You set your boundaries clearly, and for whatever reason, he's chosen to respect them. Maybe prison did give him some perspective after all. Or maybe his lawyer made him understand the legal consequences of violation. Either way, you're protected. That evening, I took Ethan to the park and watched him play with the unburdened joy of a child whose world was safe and predictable. He had never known his grandparents' toxicity, never experienced their favoritism, never had to navigate the minefield of their conditional love. To him, family meant me, his great-grandmother, who video chatted with him every week and sent thoughtful gifts. And increasingly, Marcus and Emma, who were becoming more integrated into our daily lives. This was my victory. Not revenge against my parents, not satisfaction in their downfall, but the quiet triumph of breaking a generational cycle of dysfunction. I had given my son something I never had. The certainty that he was valued and prioritized, that his well-being mattered above all else, that love didn't come with conditions or require him to diminish himself to make others comfortable. 6 years after cutting off my parents, Marcus and I got married in a small ceremony attended by close friends, our children, and my grandmother. It was intimate and joyful, free from the family drama that might have overshadowed the day if my parents had been present. Ethan and Emma served as ring bearers, giggling together as they walked down the aisle. Our vows focused on partnership, mutual respect, and our commitment to building a healthy family for our children. We blended our households slowly and carefully, attending family therapy together to navigate the transition and ensure both children felt secure and valued. The therapist helped us establish routines and traditions that honored both our individual families and the new family we were creating together. It wasn't always smooth. There were adjustments and challenges, moments of friction as we learned to navigate shared space and parenting decisions. But we faced each challenge as a team, communicating openly, respecting each other's perspectives, modeling for the children what healthy conflict resolution looked like. One evening, about a year into our marriage, I was tucking Ethan into bed when he surprised me with a question. "Mama, why don't I have a grandpa like Emma does?" Emma's father's parents were actively involved in her life, doting grandparents who visited regularly and video chatted between visits. The contrast was obvious, and I had been waiting for this question even as I dreaded it. "You had a grandpa," I said carefully, "but he made some choices that weren't healthy for our family, so we had to create distance to keep us safe." "Was he mean to you?" "In some ways, yes. He wasn't able to be the kind of grandpa you deserved, someone who would prioritize you and treat you with kindness and respect. So I made the decision that we needed to be separate from him." Ethan processed this for a moment. "Did you make him go away because he was mean?" "I created boundaries to protect you and me. That's what parents do. Keep their children safe even when it's a hard decision." "Are boundaries like rules?" "Kind of. They're like rules about how people are allowed to treat us. If someone can't follow those rules, even if they're family, we have the right to say they can't be part of our lives." "That makes sense." He yawned, already drifting towards sleep. "I'm glad you protected us, Mama." Those simple words, spoken without understanding the full weight of what they acknowledge, brought tears to my eyes. My child felt safe and protected, trusted that I would make good decisions on his behalf, understood at his young age that boundaries were healthy and necessary. That's what mattered. Not my parents' opinions or society's pressure to maintain family connections at all costs, but my son's well-being and his understanding that he deserved to be prioritized. Life continued to unfold in ways both expected and surprising. Meredith and I built a cautious but genuine relationship, meeting for coffee every few months, exchanging texts more regularly. She was in a serious relationship with a man who worked construction, building a life based on actual labor and mutual support rather than the illusory success of social media. She had returned to school to become a dental hygienist, finding satisfaction in work that had tangible results and helped people. Sometimes we talked about our childhood, processing the dysfunction from our different perspectives. She was working through her own therapy to understand how being the favored child had damaged her in ways she hadn't recognized at the time. "I'm learning that giving a child everything they want isn't love," she told me during one of our coffee meetings. "It's actually a form of neglect, because it doesn't teach them how to function in the real world or develop genuine resilience. Mom and Dad thought they were helping me, but really they were just making me dependent and incapable." "Do you resent them for that?" I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question. "I'm angry about it, yes. But it's complicated because I also benefited in some ways, at least materially. I'm working through it in therapy, learning to hold both truths, that I was harmed and that I also participated in a system that harmed you more. Our conversations weren't always easy, and sometimes we touched on topics that brought up pain for both of us. But there was value in having someone who understood the specific dysfunction of our family, who could validate experiences without needing extensive explanation. We would never be as close as sisters raised in healthy families might be. But we were building something real and honest, rooted in mutual understanding and respect. My grandmother remained a constant, loving presence in our lives. She visited several times a year, video chatted with Ethan weekly, sent thoughtful gifts and cards. She attended Ethan's in school events when her visits coincided with them, cheered at his soccer games, listened to his rambling stories with genuine interest and patience. She also provided something I hadn't expected, a model of what it looked like to acknowledge and make amends for generational failures. She spoke openly about her regrets regarding my father's upbringing, the ways her own trauma and struggles had limited her parenting, the mistakes she had made that contributed to his dysfunction. But she also showed me what accountability, without excuses, looked like. She didn't blame circumstances or claim she had done her best. She simply acknowledged that she had failed in important ways and was grateful for the opportunity to do better with her great-grandson. "I see my son in Ethan sometimes," she told me during one visit. "The same stubborn streak, the same intensity. But Ethan is growing up with something my son never had. The certainty that he's loved unconditionally, that his worth isn't dependent on his achievements or his ability to meet someone else's expectations. That's everything. You're giving him what I wish I had given his grandfather." 7 years after cutting off my parents, I received news that my father had died. Not from old age or illness, but from a heart attack at age 68. The lawyer handling his estate contacted me to inform me of his passing and to ask if I wanted any of his personal effects. There wasn't much. His years in prison and afterward had left him with minimal possessions. I felt surprisingly little at the news. Not relief or satisfaction, but not grief either. Just a kind of detached acknowledgement that a chapter had finally, definitively closed. I didn't attend the funeral. Meredith did. and she told me afterward that it had been small and sparsely attended. Our mother had been there, still bitter and victimized in her demeanor. A few distant relatives, some people from the construction business he had once owned. Meredith said the service focused on his younger years, before the fraud and imprisonment, painting a picture of a man who had once had potential before things went wrong. No one mentioned the identity theft, or the favoritism, or the systematic destruction of his daughter's financial stability in the name of his other daughter's comfort. "Do you feel anything about it?" Meredith asked me carefully during our coffee meeting after the funeral. "Sad or relieved, or anything?" "Mostly just tired," I admitted. Tired of carrying the weight of their dysfunction even at a distance. His death doesn't change anything about what he did or how it affected my life, but it's a kind of closure, I guess. The knowledge that he'll never show up demanding access or violating boundaries. "He left you something in his will," she said, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "The lawyer gave it to me to pass along, since you didn't attend the funeral." I unfolded the paper and found a handwritten letter, dated a few months before his death. It was shorter than his previous letter from prison, less self-justifying, but still not quite achieving true accountability. "Sophia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know that I understand why you cut me out of your life. I don't agree with all your decisions, but I understand them. I made mistakes, serious ones, and you protected yourself and your son from the consequences. That's what a good parent does. I'm sorry I wasn't a better father to you. I'm sorry I favored your sister and made you feel worthless. I'm sorry I stole your identity and destroyed your credit. Most of all, I'm sorry I grabbed you that day and said your son didn't matter. That was the moment I lost you, and I've had 7 years to sit with the knowledge that I deserved to lose you. I hope you've built a good life. I hope Ethan is happy and healthy. I hope you found the family support you deserved, but never got from me. Don't let my failures define you. You were always stronger and better than I gave you credit for. I wish I had told you that before it was too late. I'm sorry. Dad." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my purse. "It's closer to a real apology," Meredith observed. "But still not quite there, sir." "No," I agreed. "But it's something. More than I expected, honestly. Does it change how you feel?" "Not really. The time for his apology to matter was years ago, before the fraud, before the favoritism, before the assault. Getting it now, after he's dead and can face no more consequences, it doesn't heal anything." She nodded understanding. I kept the letter in a drawer at home, not displayed but not discarded either. Someday, when Ethan was older and asked more detailed questions about his grandfather, I would show it to him. Not as evidence of change or redemption, but as a complicated ending to a complicated story. My mother outlived my father by 3 years. I learned of her death through Meredith again. Pancreatic cancer discovered too late for treatment. Meredith asked if I wanted to visit her in hospice, suggested that maybe closure would be valuable. But I declined. We had already had whatever closure we were going to have. Her presence in my life had ended 7 years before, and her physical death was just a formality, confirming what had already been true. I didn't attend her funeral either. Meredith understood by this point, didn't pressure me or suggest I was being too harsh. She went alone, buried both parents within 3 years, and then called me afterward to process her complicated grief. "I loved them," she said through tears. "Even knowing what they did, even understanding the dysfunction, they were my parents, and I loved them." "That's okay," I assured her. "Your feelings are allowed to be complicated. Mine are too, in a different way. I'm not glad they're dead, but I'm also not grieving them because I grieved the parents I needed years ago. By the time their physical deaths came, I had already mourned the loss of what could have been if they had been different people." 10 years after walking out of my parents' house, I stood in the backyard of the home Marcus and I had bought together, watching Ethan and Emma play with their younger siblings. We had 2 more children, a daughter and another son, who were being raised in an entirely different environment than the one I had experienced. They were growing up knowing they were all equally valued, that their needs mattered, that family meant mutual support and respect. Ethan was 14 now, a thoughtful teenager who knew the story of his grandparents in age-appropriate detail. He understood that sometimes people who should love you fail to do so, and that protecting yourself from that failure is not only acceptable but necessary. He had never known anything but being prioritized and valued, and it showed in his confidence and emotional stability. Marcus came out of the house carrying lemonade for everyone, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the life we had built together. This was what I had protected when I walked away from my parents' dysfunction. Not just my own well-being, but Ethan's, and eventually our whole family's. "You look thoughtful," Marcus observed, settling into the chair beside me. "What are you thinking about?" "Just how different everything is from where I started. 10 years ago, I was a single mother struggling to survive, trapped in my parents' toxic system, thinking I had to accept their treatment because they were family. Look at us now." He took my hand, our fingers intertwining with the easy comfort of long partnership. "You built this, Sophia. You made the hard choices that created space for all this good to happen. I couldn't have done it without support. My grandmother, you, Meredith eventually. It took a village, even if it was a village I had to carefully select. That's wisdom too, knowing who to let in and who to keep out." I leaned against him, watching our children play. In the distance, I could hear my grandmother on a video call with our youngest, reading him a bedtime story from across the country. This was family. Not perfect, but healthy. Not without conflict, but with tools to navigate it respectfully. Not defined by obligation, but chosen and built with care. Sometimes people ask me if I regretted cutting off my parents, if I wished I had tried harder to reconcile or given them more chances. The answer was always no, delivered firmly and without hesitation. I had given them 32 years of chances, 32 years of hoping they would see me, value me, treat me as worthy of the same investment and care they gave my sister. 32 years of being disappointed and diminished and dismissed. When I finally drew a line and said enough, when I chose my son's well-being over their dysfunction, when I walked away from the abuse they had normalized, I didn't lose family. I lost a toxic system that had been slowly destroying me. And in the space created by that loss, I built something infinitely better. The story wasn't about revenge, though consequences had certainly followed their actions. It wasn't about getting even or making them suffer, though they had lost much in the aftermath of their choices. It was simply about protection and boundaries, and the recognition that family isn't defined by biology, but by behavior. by respect, by mutual care and support. Some families of origin provide that. Mine didn't. So I built my own, carefully and intentionally, surrounding myself and my children with people who understood that love shouldn't hurt, that support shouldn't come with conditions, that being family means actually showing up for each other in meaningful ways. That was my victory. Not in their downfall, but in my rising from the ashes of their dysfunction to create something healthy and whole. And on quiet evenings like this one, watching my family laugh and play and thrive, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Some bridges aren't worth maintaining. Some relationships aren't worth salvaging. And sometimes walking away is not an ending, but a beginning. The first step toward building the life you actually deserve. If my story resonates with you, if you recognize patterns from your own life in the favoritism and dysfunction I experienced, please know this: you deserve better. Your children deserve better. Your future deserves better. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. Protecting yourself and your children from toxic family members isn't cruel, it's necessary. And building a chosen family based on mutual respect and genuine care is not only possible, it's infinitely more rewarding than maintaining connections that diminish and damage you. The family you're born into doesn't have to define your entire life. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is walking away from people who refuse to love you properly and building something new from the ground up. Trust yourself. Protect your children, draw your lines, and don't look back with guilt or regret. Look forward with hope and determination. Because on the other side of that difficult decision is freedom, healing, and the possibility of the life you always deserved, but were never given. That's what I found, and that's what I hope for anyone facing similar choices. 10 years later, I still don't regret walking out that door. I only regret not doing it sooner. But timing is everything, and we make the choices we're capable of making when we're capable of making them. When I was ready, when my son's safety and well-being became more important than my parents' feelings or society's expectations, I found the strength to leave. And everything that came after, the struggles and the healing and the building and the joy, it was all worth it. Every difficult moment, every hard choice, every boundary maintained, they all led to this. To a home filled with love and laughter. To children who know their worth. To a partnership based on equality and respect. To a life that is truly, authentically mine. That's not revenge. That's redemption. And it's available to anyone brave enough to walk through the fire of difficult choices toward the other side. Your future matters. Your children's futures matter. Your well-being matters. Don't let anyone, not even family, tell you otherwise. And if they do, remember this story. Remember that walking away is sometimes the most powerful choice you can make. Remember that you deserve better. And remember that on the other side of that decision is freedom you might not even be able to imagine yet. But it's there, waiting for you to be brave enough to claim it. I claimed mine, and I'm never going back. 15 years after that pivotal day when I walked away, I find myself reflecting on the journey with a clarity that only time and distance can provide. My life today bears no resemblance to the one I lived under my parents' shadow. The transformation has been so complete that sometimes I struggle to recognize the woman I was before. The one who believed she had to accept crumbs of affection and call it love. Ethan is 19 now, a college sophomore studying engineering with the confidence of someone who has never doubted his worth. When he left for university last year, he hugged me tight and said something that still brings tears to my eyes. "Mum, I know I don't say it enough, but thank you for always putting me first. I see how some of my friends' families operate. All the dysfunction and favoritism and conditional love. And I'm so grateful you never let me grow up in that. You gave me the greatest gift, knowing I matter." Those words validated every hard choice, every boundary set, every relationship severed. My son would never know what it felt like to be the forgotten child, to measure his worth against a favored sibling, to sacrifice his well-being for someone else's convenience. That cycle ended with me, and that's a legacy worth more than any inheritance or family connection. Emma, now 18, has become like a daughter to me. She calls me her bonus mom and includes me in mother-daughter activities at school without hesitation. Our younger children, Lily, who is 9, and Noah, who is 7, have grown up in a household where love is freely given, where mistakes are learning opportunities rather than character indictments, where each child's individual needs are recognized and met without comparison or competition. Marcus and I have created what we call an intentional family, one where values are discussed openly, where conflict is addressed rather than avoided, where everyone's voice matters regardless of age. We hold weekly family meetings where even the youngest children can raise concerns or suggest changes to our routines. We celebrate each child's unique talents and interests without creating hierarchies of importance. We model the kind of partnership we hope our children will seek in their own adult relationships, one based on mutual respect, shared decision-making, and genuine affection. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago at the age of 89. Her final years were spent surrounded by family, the chosen family I had built, rather than the broken one she had birthed. She died knowing she had made amends for her son's failures, that she had provided her great-grandchildren with the kind of stable, loving grandparent relationship every child deserves. At her funeral, I gave a eulogy that celebrated not just who she had been, but who she had chosen to become when confronted with her son's dysfunction. She showed me that it's never too late to break toxic patterns, I said to the gathered mourners. She proved that acknowledging harm is more important than defending the person who caused it. She taught me that real love requires accountability, not excuses. And she gave my children the gift of knowing what healthy family relationships look like. Those lessons are her true legacy. Meredith stood beside me at the funeral, her own transformation nearly complete. She had graduated with her dental hygiene degree and now worked at a practice that served low-income communities, finding purpose in work that helped people rather than just building her own image. She had married her construction worker boyfriend in a simple ceremony 2 years earlier, and they were expecting their first child. Our relationship had evolved into something genuine, if still careful. We would never be best friends. The wounds of our childhood went too deep for that. But we had become allies in understanding and breaking the patterns that had damaged us both. She often asked me for parenting advice as her pregnancy progressed, wanting to ensure she didn't repeat our parents' mistakes. "How do I make sure I don't play favorites if we have more kids?" she asked during one of our coffee meetings. "How do I give my child enough without creating entitlement? How do I show love without making it conditional on achievement?" These questions, so thoughtful and self-aware, showed how far she had come from the entitled influencer who once thought a shopping trip was more important than her nephew's health. I shared what I had learned, the tools and strategies Marcus and I used, the therapy insights that had helped me parent differently. But more importantly, I reminded her that the fact she was asking these questions meant she was already on the right path. Our parents never questioned their favoritism or its impact. You are already doing better by being willing to examine your own behavior and make changes. The financial restitution from my parents' fraud was finally paid in full last year, a decade after the initial judgment. The money, once it cleared various legal fees and penalties, came to just over $80,000, and I put most of it into college funds for our children and donated the rest to organizations supporting victims of family financial abuse. I didn't want to build my future on the ashes of their crimes, but I could use those funds to ensure my children never face the educational struggles I had endured. My career has flourished in ways I never imagined possible during those dark years of struggling to survive. I now run my own design firm with a small team of talented designers, and we specialize in branding for nonprofits and social enterprises. The work is fulfilling, combining my creative skills with a sense of purpose that had been missing when I was just scraping by. Last month, I was asked to speak at a conference for adult children of dysfunctional families. The topic was setting boundaries without guilt, something I had become unintentionally expert in through necessity. As I stood before a room of 200 people, many of them visibly emotional as I shared my story, I realized that my experience, as painful as it had been, could serve a greater purpose. If even one person in that audience found the courage to protect themselves and their children from toxic family dynamics, then perhaps all the suffering had meaning beyond just my personal journey. The questions afterward were heartbreaking in their familiarity. How do I know if I'm overreacting? Isn't family supposed to forgive? What if I'm making a mistake? What if they change? I answered each one with the honesty I wish someone had given me decades earlier. You're not overreacting if you feel unsafe or diminished. Forgiveness doesn't require ongoing contact with the people who harm you. The only mistake is continuing to accept unacceptable treatment. And if they change, truly change with accountability and amends, you can reassess from a position of safety, but you're not obligated to give infinite chances while they figure it out. One woman approached me after the session, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "My parents treat my daughter like they treated me, like she's less important than my brother's kids. I've been making excuses, trying to manage it, hoping it would get better. But you're right. I need to protect her, even if it means losing them." I gave her the names of resources, support groups, therapists who specialized in family estrangement. I shared my lawyer's contact information in case she needed legal help with boundaries. And I reminded her of what took me too long to learn. You're not losing them. You're freeing yourself and your child from a dynamic that was never healthy. The real loss happened long ago when they chose favoritism over fairness. You're just finally acknowledging it. These moments of connection with others who understood the specific pain of family dysfunction had become increasingly important to me. I had joined online support communities, attended conferences, even started a blog where I wrote about my experiences with boundaries and healing. The response had been overwhelming. Thousands of people reaching out to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to simply say thank you for putting words to their pain. Marcus often jokes that I've become an accidental activist for family estrangement, but there's truth in it. I never set out to be a voice for this issue, but having lived it and come through the other side with a healthy, happy life, I felt a responsibility to help others see that this path was possible, that you could walk away from toxic family and not just survive but thrive, that protecting yourself and your children wasn't selfish, it was the most loving thing you could do. Last year, I published a book about my experience. The title was Choosing My Child: How I Broke Generational Patterns by Setting Boundaries My Parents Couldn't Respect. It wasn't a bestseller or anything close, but it found its audience. The reviews from readers who saw themselves in my story, who found courage in my choices, who felt less alone in their own struggles, those made every vulnerability in sharing my story worthwhile. One review in particular stayed with me. "This book saved my relationship with my daughter," the reviewer wrote. "I was repeating the same favoritism patterns my parents used with me and my siblings. Reading about the long-term damage this caused helped me see what I was doing before it was too late. I've started therapy, apologized to my daughter, and am actively working to change. Thank you for your honesty. That was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of my journey. Not just breaking the cycle in my own family, but potentially helping others break it in theirs. The ripple effects of generational dysfunction can spread wide, but so can the ripple effects of healing and conscious change. Today, as I write this reflection, I'm preparing for Ethan's 20th birthday celebration. We're hosting a gathering at our home with his friends from college. Emma and her boyfriend, Marcus's parents, who have been wonderful grandparents to all our children. Meredith and her husband and their new baby. And of course our younger kids, who are excited to celebrate their big brother. There's a moment before every family gathering now where I pause and take it in. The laughter, the genuine affection, the absence of tension or favoritism or manipulation. This is what I fought for. This is what those hard choices created. This is the family I chose to build when I walked away from the family that couldn't love me properly. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I allow myself to feel the grief for what never was and never will be. I grieve the parents I needed but never had. I grieve the childhood that could have been mine if they had been capable of equal love. I grieve the loss of the fantasy that one day they would see me and value me and apologize with true understanding. But that grief coexists with gratitude for what is. For Marcus sleeping beside me, a partner who sees me and values me and treats me as an equal. For children who know they're loved unconditionally. For a sister who is doing the hard work of becoming better. For a grandmother who showed me that family could be healthy before she passed. For friends and community who chose me as surely as I chose them. This is the truth I've learned. You can grieve what you lost and celebrate what you built. You can acknowledge the pain of family estrangement and embrace the peace it brings. You can recognize that your parents failed you and still build a successful, joyful life. These aren't contradictions. They're the complex reality of healing from family dysfunction. I often think about that moment 15 years ago when my father pushed me against the wall and told me my son didn't matter. At the time, it felt like the worst moment of my life. The ultimate betrayal. The final proof of my worthlessness in their eyes. But looking back now, I see it differently. That moment was a gift, though a brutal one. It shattered the last of my illusions. It showed me with perfect clarity exactly who they were and what I meant to them. It gave me the final push I needed to do what I should have done years earlier, to walk away and never look back. Without that moment, I might have spent another decade hoping for change, sacrificing my well-being and Ethan's for the fantasy of family reconciliation. I might have taught my son that his needs came second, that he should accept less than he deserved, that love meant tolerating mistreatment. That moment, painful as it was, saved us both. The bruises on my back faded within weeks. The bruises on my heart took years to heal. But they did heal, slowly and imperfectly, through therapy and chosen family and the daily practice of building something better. Today, I can talk about my parents without rage or longing. I can acknowledge the complexity of them, human beings, with their own damage and limitations, while maintaining my boundaries and protecting what I've built. I don't wish them harm. I simply wish them away from my life and my children's lives. And that's okay. Not every story has a reconciliation. Not every family can be fixed. Some relationships are better ended than maintained. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to walk away from people who refuse to treat you with basic dignity and respect. If you're reading this and struggling with similar choices, here's what I want you to know. You're not being dramatic. You're not overreacting. You're not required to maintain relationships that harm you, regardless of biology or social expectations. Your well-being matters. Your children's well-being matters. And you have the right to build the life and family you deserve, even if it means leaving behind the family you were born into. The path won't be easy. There will be judgment from people who don't understand, guilt from years of conditioning, moments of doubt when you wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. But on the other side of those difficulties is freedom. The freedom to be yourself without constantly moderating your behavior to avoid triggering someone else's dysfunction. The freedom to raise your children without the weight of toxic family patterns. The freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. That freedom is worth fighting for. It was worth it for me, and it will be worth it for you. 15 years later, I stand in the life I built from the ashes of family estrangement. And I have no regrets. None. Not about the boundaries I set. Not about the charges I filed. Not about the permanent distance I've maintained. Every choice was made in service of protection and healing, and every choice proved right in the long run. My children are thriving. My marriage is strong. My career is fulfilling. My relationships are healthy. And I am finally, after 32 years of feeling worthless and forgotten, learning to see myself as valuable and worthy of love. This is what victory looks like. Not revenge or vindication, but healing. Not getting even, but getting free. Not making them suffer, but refusing to suffer anymore myself. If my story helps even one person make the choices that lead to their own victory, then sharing these painful memories serves a purpose beyond my personal healing. We break these cycles one family at a time, one boundary at a time, one brave choice at a time. I broke it for my family. You can break it for yours. The first step is the hardest, acknowledging that something is deeply wrong and that you have the right to protect yourself from it. The second step is finding support. People who understand and validate your experience rather than pressuring you to accept the unacceptable. The third step is action, setting boundaries and maintaining them even when it's hard. The rest is time and healing and building something better. 15 years from now, when you look back on the choice you made today to protect yourself and your children, you won't regret it. You'll be grateful. Grateful for the peace. Grateful for the healing. Grateful for the life you built when you finally chose yourself. That's my message. That is my truth. That's the gift I can offer from the crucible of my experience. Choose yourself. Choose your children. Choose the family you deserve, even if it means walking away from the family you were given. And know that on the other side of that difficult choice is everything you've been seeking. Peace, healing, joy, freedom. It's there, waiting for you to be brave enough to claim it. Just like it was waiting for me. Just like I finally, after 32 years of accepting less than I deserved, found the courage to claim it. And I've never looked back. The story doesn't end here, of course. Life continues to unfold, with new challenges and joys and lessons. But the foundation is solid now. The dysfunction stopped with me. The favoritism ended with my generation. The conditional love was replaced with genuine acceptance. And my children, all of them, will grow up knowing they matter, that their needs are valid, that love doesn't require them to diminish themselves. That's the legacy I'm building. Not wealth or status or family connections, but the simple, powerful legacy of breaking toxic patterns and creating something healthier. It's the legacy that matters most. It's the legacy my parents couldn't give me, but the one I've given my children. And 15 years later, that's more than enough.